This afternoon, our session is going to be on pursuing doctoral degree, pursuing your aspirations for getting a PhD, a Doctor of Philosophy, or an EdD, a Doctor of Education. Our outline: why we might want to pursue a doctoral degree. 2, how we would identify appropriate programs to apply to. 3, what the application process looks like. 4, weighing the various offers of acceptance. And 5, how to succeed in the doctoral program in the long run. So I think the most important question for doing a doctoral program is why we would want to do it in the first place. There's going to be motives which are more sustaining over the long run and other motives which are harder to sustain. Doing a doctoral degree is a lot like running a marathon, and our ability to run it, preserving our health and having success in the end, depend a lot about why we were doing it in the first place. So some people want to pursue a doctoral program because they didn't find jobs as quickly as they wanted to after getting an MA degree. I think this is a harder to sustain motive for doing a PhD. The job markets for having an MA degree and having a PhD are pretty different from each other, the kinds of jobs that you would qualify for or not be qualified. And success or lack of success in one of these markets isn't going to necessarily correlate with success or lack of success in the other. And also the job market for people with PhD is actually a pretty tight job market, especially if you want to work in academia. It's a little bit more, there are more opportunities if you're willing to work in industry. But it's not necessarily true that the job market is going to be any easier having a PhD than an MA. It depends on the kind of job. If getting a doctorate degree is mostly your parents' expectation, that's also going to be harder to sustain in the long run. This is something that you really have to want to do because it's going to ask a lot of you. If you don't enjoy teaching language as much as you thought you would being in the classroom, it's not always the case that having a doctoral degree is the best way out of that or the best other opportunity. There are other jobs that are available to you as an MA degree holder, jobs in assessment, jobs in curriculum design, jobs in publication, jobs in technology that don't necessarily involve classroom teaching. So there are opportunities to work in the field of applied linguistics, to work with language professionally outside of the language classroom, even with an MA degree. If you want to earn more money than you can with a master's degree, well, there are some teaching jobs that pay a little bit more if you have a PhD. But there are also well-paid master's degree jobs in industry. So your pay doesn't necessarily exactly correlate, but I think even if you can guarantee, I will get more money in the long run if I have a doctoral degree. If you get a job at a private school, a private K-12 school, this is often true that having a doctoral degree gives you a significant pay rise. Sometimes the money itself can be a motive which is harder to sustain. Other people think that you'll get more prestige and more respect than people with master's degrees, so this is why they want to do it. Again, none of the motives on this page are necessarily wrong. I just think in my experience and seeing other people pursuing a PhD, they can be harder to sustain in the long run. Another set of harder to sustain motives, if you admire a particular professor and you really want to just apprentice yourself to that one particular professor, well, what if that professor switches to another university? Or what if that professor turns out to be a really difficult person to work with? If that was your only motivation for getting a PhD, that could sour, that could change over the course of your doctoral work. So it's more important to, I think, have a larger motive that you're working with. Some feel you'll face less pressure on the job market. As I alluded to, I think there's just as much pressure in the doctoral degree market as there is in the master's degree market. Having power over other people and having a doctoral degree, this goes without saying, but that's probably not a great motive for getting a doctoral program. Avoiding the military draft or postponing it in their country of citizenship, that might be nice. You might prefer being in a doctoral program to being in the military, but it can be hard in the long run when you're kind of in that middle of that long slog to remind yourself of why you're doing it. Or if you seek long-term job security and the freedom that tenure offers. To be honest, tenured positions are few and hard to come by. And so guaranteeing that you're going to have a tenured position, you might find really rewarding employment with a doctoral degree that isn't a tenured position. And that's probably going to be increasingly true as time goes on. So what are better motives? What are the motives that are going to put us in a better position to succeed over the long run of doing our PhD, or a doctoral degree from 4 to 8 years a lot of times? If the if the government that you're working for or a funding agency requires you to get a doctorate, that's often actually a good motivation that helps you. And that usually means that you're being provided with the time and the resources that you would need to succeed in a doctoral program. If you really love teaching adults in university contexts and you think that there's better job opportunities for PhD, this was true of me. This is really why I loved getting a PhD. I really wanted to teach. I wanted to teach college students. I wanted to teach adults in a university setting. And that love really helped carry me through this. If you want to work as a language teacher educator rather than as a language teacher, if you've spent time as a language teacher and you realize, wow, if I really want to be a change maker in this field, make the long range difference I would love to see, I need to be a teacher educator. That usually requires a PhD. Or to be an administrator. This also often requires a PhD to really make the high level change, to be the kind of transformative figure in the field that you may aspire to be. Or if you enjoy doing research, if you've got a passion and you want to be freed to really pursue the truth, to really pursue particular avenues of research, how can language teaching, language learning, language use be done in a more effective and a more ethical way? That's a great motive. Just being passionate about a topic is kind of related to that of doing research, having a clear passion. If you want to get legal status to reside in a country, this may seem like a questionable motive, but I've actually seen this really succeed as a motive of people, that they really love the country they live in and they want to stay there. And so getting a PhD is a great opportunity to stay in the place they love, doing the thing they love, or to engage in advocacy. I think a lot of times having a PhD does increase your prestige, your ability to argue for certain populations, for certain positions, for certain ideas. And another one would be you want to teach more specialized courses. Often if you want to really teach academic writing, you need a PhD in composition or rhetoric. If you have a specific class that you find yourself loving to teach, having a PhD in that subject area is going to open more doors. Mentoring younger scholars as a professor is a great thing to do. And maybe that role of mentoring is something you see you could do better with having a PhD. And there are actually different job prospects which can be better, especially if you're willing to be mobile. There's a lot of positions overseas that having a PhD is going to really open up a lot of doors. It allows you to change employers. It allows you to attract the attention of publishers, to become a more higher paid administrator. There's a lot of opportunities that do open once you have a PhD, even outside of the language classroom. Okay, so let's say that you want to do a PhD. You've sort of reckoned within your mind, your heart, your soul. You figured out why you want to do this, why you want to pursue a doctoral program. I think one of the first questions is, would you want to work for a while first? I taught for 6 years after getting my master's degree before I did my doctoral program, and I really enjoyed that. Having had a lot of real world experience, a lot of real world context, I think made me a much better teacher, made me a much better student. I had so much more context in which to apply the things that we were learning in my doctoral classes. But there are other people who might want to do it right away after master's. While I'm in this school mode, while I'm in this mode of learning, of being a student, I want to go right on to a PhD. And that may differ from person to person. A question which I think is really effective is, whose take on your passion do you want? A PhD is a super rare opportunity to spend 4 to 6 years of your life answering one question that you're super passionate about, answering one question that you love. And if you've got a passion for that topic, for that question, it's important to find other people who have an interesting set of lenses, an interesting set of tools. And you could actually study the same question in our field through many different kinds of programs, each of which would give you a different set of core classes, a different set of tools and questions to ask about the issue that you're passionate about. So the most obvious follow-on program might be an applied linguistics program, something like Penn State or Georgia State. That's really following on very directly from what we do in our MIS programs and the TFL or TESOL programs. But you may choose to do a linguistics program. I did my linguistics PhD at the University of South Carolina, had a very strong applied focus about language learning and teaching. It had great support for that. It wasn't just theoretical. So some of you may discover that what you actually want to do is theoretical linguistics. But even if you are interested in applied work within linguistics, getting a PhD in linguistics can make you eligible for both theoretical and applied linguistics jobs, whereas getting a PhD in applied linguistics makes you eligible really only for the applied linguistics jobs. You really can't successfully apply to the jobs in theoretical linguistics. Another set of programs which our students find themselves really well qualified for is curriculum and instruction. If that of teaching methodology, teaching materials, if that's really your passion, a program, either an EdD or a PhD in curriculum instruction might be right up your alley. And you could actually just go into straight education. If you wanted to get a job in educational administration, this is something you could do. And you could do a PhD, which tends to be much more research focused, much more theoretical, or an EdD, a Doctorate of Education, which often combines management and administrative coursework with coursework in pedagogy and education. There's also a lot of programs these days that are called second language studies. You can think of Michigan State or Hawaii. And these are an applied linguistics program, basically, but they have a stronger connection maybe to industry and are much more interested often about the cognitive science aspects of this, what's going on in the mind as a second language learner is working. A third question to ask after we think about when in my career would I want to do it and whose take on my passion most aligns with mine is the fit. Do you want a big program or a small program? In some ways, there can be a lot of opportunities to being a big fish in a small program. You get a lot of attention from professors, but being in a big program, you could have an entire lab of people who are really interested in just the same questions that you have, a greater set of laboratory tools, of maybe fieldwork sites that are available at a large university. So program size matters. The degree of interdisciplinarity, in some doctoral programs, it's an interdisciplinary program where the professors are housed in other fields and they come together to offer a doctoral degree. A nice thing about that is often that program is a respite from their departmental politics and they love working with those graduate students. I think my linguistics program at the University of South Carolina was an interdisciplinary program. The professors were in anthropology or education or Spanish, and they really loved coming together collegially around the linguistics program. And also looking at the coursework, what's required of you. Can you take interdisciplinary work? Can you take courses and other programs on campus and have that count toward the completion of your degree? And I think another real important question is cost of living. While PhD programs or EdD programs will often offer you a stipend, you do some kind of work for the university and in return they'll pay for your tuition, you often still do have to pay for the cost of living, and the living stipend you get often doesn't fully cover those costs. So choosing a place with a lower cost of living as opposed to a higher cost of living may be something you would want to consider. So in general, reputation. Look at the faculty bios at the program that you want to apply to. Read their bios, look at their publications, whose work is of interest. And if you can find a program where there's 3 or 4 different faculty whose work is super inspiring to you, super intriguing to you, that's a really good sign that even if that one particular professor you want isn't available to become chair of your committee, you could put together a doctoral committee with several different professors at that school, and you would be happy to work with all of them or with some set of them. Talk to current students and really candidly find out, it could be sometimes that the most brilliant and well-published professors are really hard to work with as a doctoral program advisor, whereas there could be other professors that are really great, are supportive, the students have great experiences. You really get a sense of the culture of the program, the set of expectations. Is there a lot of inter-program fighting, or do the professors generally work together to help their students succeed? Only the current students would really be able to candidly tell you that. You can look at where graduates from these programs are teaching, what kinds of, at the alumni page of the program, what kinds of jobs they get afterwards. That's a really good clue to you about your level of aspirations, whether that's a good fit for this program. The availability of faculty, are faculty available to take on new students? You might find a professor that you really want to work with, but they're full. They already have a full docket of PhD students, and they can't take any new ones on. That's something that you can find out in the application process as you're informing yourself. And also look at the completion rate. Ask the departmental administrators how many students complete their PhD after 4 years, after 5 years, after 6 years, or after longer. Ideally, you would want to be able to enter a program where you can complete it more quickly. If the average completion rate is 6 or 7 years, this is a sign that the faculty often make the students jump through a lot of hoops and drag it out. And you may want to get an earlier start on your career. Looking at the financial aid, do they offer you 4 years of support? Do they offer you 5? Is it only 2 years of guaranteed support? And then you have to compete to fund yourself for years 3 and 4 or year 5 or 6? That's really important to find out. You should be able to get, if you're a strong applicant, your doctoral program paid for somewhere. You may not get it paid for fully in the school that you most want to go to, but you can probably find some school in the world that will be willing to help fund your doctoral program if you're a strong candidate. If it comes to funding, let's say that they say, oh, we'll offer you a teaching assistantship so you can teach for us for 4 years, and that will reduce your tuition or cover the cost of your tuition and maybe even give you a living stipend on top of that. But ask what kinds of courses you would be likely to teach, how many. If you're teaching a 3-3 load as a PhD student or even a 2-1 load, that can be a lot of work which detracts from your ability to study. Are the courses you would teach in your field, or are they going to be in another field? Many times applied linguistics PhD students find themselves teaching freshman composition classes where there's a great need. That's great if you love teaching freshman composition, but if you don't, is that really the kind of program that you would want to take? Do you ever get the opportunity to design and to run your own course? That would make you super competitive for the job market later on. And that's not an opportunity that many schools will offer their PhD students. But if you can find a school that does give their strong PhD students the opportunity to design and to run their own course, that might be something to keep in mind. And also make note of which different research labs or centers are available on campus that you might want to work with. Is there a research school where you can work with the learners in that university's own school? Is there an eye tracking laboratory? Is there a neuroimaging laboratory? What kinds of labs would you want to do? What kinds of funding for overseas travel, for overseas data collection, for collaboration might be available? Okay, so what should you expect? Let's say that you found a school that you're really interested in. I personally recommend finding about 7 to 10 schools that you're interested in and applying to all of them, because you never know exactly which ones you're going to get into, and you may not get into your top schools. You may get into your bottom schools but not really want to go, and somewhere in that spectrum there's probably going to be a school that you would be willing to go to and is willing to fund you. And I think that's the balance of finding a school. It's like, I would want to study there, I'm willing to study there, even if it's not my number one school, but they are also willing to fund me, which is an important consideration as well. So applying to a range of 7 to 10 schools, I think, is really important. The first thing that you're going to have to work on is your personal statement. So every school is going to ask you for a personal statement where you describe your vision for the research. And it's difficult to sometimes know how much detail to go in. There are schools that really want to see that you have a very detailed research plan. There can be individual professors who say, well, if you know every detail about what you want to do coming in, then what are we for? And so this can be actually hard to read in advance. And there may be no reliable way to know ahead of time who's going to be sitting on the committee that reads the applications and chooses to accept them. But in general, you want to be able to clearly articulate your vision, why this program, and to, in general, talk about the issue that you want to solve in the world. I think a PhD is, you've got a problem in the world that needs to be solved, and you get to spend 4 to 6 years of your life helping to solve that problem. So speaking with passion, speaking with clarity and with detail about the issue that you see in the world and why this program is a great program to help you address that issue. That's what these personal statements are all about. So you need to make an argument about why they would need you, why they would benefit from having you and your experiences, your background, your passions in their program, as well as why you need them, why those particular professors, why those particular research labs, those particular courses are going to be the best fit. The more detail and specificity you're able to give about that match between what they offer and what you bring to the table, the more successful your application is going to be. And be prepared to write this many times. Some schools, these are going to be 500-word statements, some 1,000, some 5,000-word statements. Some have very different speculations or specifications about what has to be in the statement. So you'll have to prepare several different versions. Most schools will require a writing sample, which you'll have some good writing samples by the end of this master's program. Many require language proficiency tests in the GRE, the Graduate Record Exam, which sort of gauges your level of preparedness for doctoral work. Your curriculum vitae, you'll have to have an updated CV with all of your different employment and training backgrounds that you've had. Evidence of teaching. If you've had a chance to teach before, this can really get you a good TA-ship. People who have strong teaching backgrounds, strong teaching records, can often get the best teaching positions when they do their PhD program. Getting recommendation letters is very important. I think a lot of times you have the ability to waive the right to your recommendation letter. It's usually easier to get professors to write a recommendation letter for you if you have waived that right, if the professor is able to write directly to the program instead of sending the letter to you that you would send on to the program. You want to think about the professors, not necessarily whose classes you had the best grades in, but whose relationship, you had a very good relationship with that professor. You worked well together, you learned a lot from them. As a professor, I can say, some students who maybe had like a B+ in my class, but we had a great relationship and I saw a lot of potential in what they did. They demonstrated it to me in other ways. I think in some ways it's easier to write a recommendation letter for that person than someone who had an A in my class, but I really had very little interaction with, and I don't have many memorable details that stand out in my brain about what they were. Schools want to see very detailed recommendation letters that the professor or whoever's writing the recommendation letter will cite specific things that you did, specific work that you've done, specific challenges that you've overcome. And ask for these recommendation letters well in advance. And also, you should expect to do personal contact. If you can visit the campus, to do that, writing emails, scheduling Skype meetings with current students, with other prospective students, with current faculty, with alumni, that would be great. And managing expectations. No one loves to get a rejection letter. It hurts their self-esteem, but very, very smart people get rejected. I don't know anyone who's ever been accepted to all of the PhD programs they applied to, even people who went on to have brilliant careers. We're going to be rejected. And the rejection doesn't mean that we're a bad person. It can mean that the committee doesn't see us as being a perfect fit for what they have to offer, or that the professor who would be the most natural one to work with you is going to be on leave or isn't taking any new students or is going to be retiring soon. There can be many, many different reasons why you were rejected, and those reasons aren't going to be clear. Often there's no obligation, and sometimes there's legal blocks from telling you all of the details about why you weren't accepted. So you have to be prepared in yourself to have rejection letters and have multiple rejection letters, and maybe even apply in multiple years, not being accepted the first year, but working on your application to make it better for the second year, and have your self-esteem be able to survive that and go through it. Let's say that you get multiple offers. You apply to 7 to 10 different schools and you get acceptance offers from 2 or 3. And so now you're deciding between the 2 and 3 schools that you've been accepted to. I think a great consideration is length of program. Can you really graduate in 4 years? Will it be 5? Is it going to be more like 7 or 8? So working with the administrators, finding out that data on completion rates is important. Can you get courses waived? Are there courses you've had in your master's program that they'll let you waive out of a course in the PhD? That's great. You get those credits and then you can free up that to take a more specialized course, which is more of your interest, or you can move ahead to the next step more quickly because you've covered some of the core general ed requirements for that doctoral program. In fact, you might want to consider European or Australian programs where there are very few courses. A lot of times those doctoral programs are mostly based on research and very little on coursework. So if you don't want to take a lot more classes, looking in Europe or looking in Australia might be a better fit for you. How long does the financial aid last? What is the cost of living in the city, as I mentioned? Are there other colleagues who are really interested in the same issues as you? What is the exact constellation of professors or other graduate students? Many programs put their list of current graduate students on their website, and you can see what those current graduate students are passionate about, What group of people would you love to hang out with in a cafe talking about the issues that you're passionate about? That can be a great factor in accepting an offer. Are there employment opportunities off campus if the funding does run out or isn't as high as you like? Do you have to teach or do you have to take summer courses, or can you take that? Some people that's an advantage because they would like to go through faster. Others, that's a disadvantage if you're expected to be engaged in the summer because you want the summer to really focus on your research in an undistracted way. Are the classes online or not? And is that a positive thing or a negative thing? That might help you decide among the offers that you get. Finally, there's a lot of hoops to jump through after you've been admitted. So what does it look like as you go through your PhD program? You may have to take at first some remedial coursework. If you're applying to a PhD that your MA was not in, they may expect you to take a few classes with other MA students just to get to the baseline that they want. Those may not count toward your PhD graduation. So that could be a first hoop that you'd have to jump through, something you'd want to consider. Then there's core coursework. Usually this would include a project at the end of each class. And most classes culminate in a project and a writing sample that could become a published article. The hope is that each of your core classes that you would take is going to result in a publishable article for you so that you could have publications already when you finish your PhD program before you go on the job market. Choosing an advisor is an important part of the process. And your first choice of advisor may not be their first choice, that you may not be the one that they would want to work with. So working that out ahead of time, who would advise me if I came to this program, and finding an advisor, maybe finding a second choice advisor if the first one isn't available, is an important part. You would work together to create a dissertation committee once you have an advisor who would be your chair. Usually find 2 or 3 other professors who would form a committee to help shepherd you through the dissertation writing process. You often have to take qualifying exams, which prove that you have enough knowledge in those core classes that you can move on to taking the more specialized courses. You then have to often take comprehensive examinations as well, which this is not available in every program, but is often a final step before you start working on your dissertation. You have to propose what you want to do for your dissertation and defend that idea. This is usually in writing to the committee, and then they orally ask you questions. So you say, this is what I'm going to do my dissertation on. This is the important background. These are my steps of the research plan. Then when you defend that, you're called ABD, all but dissertation. So it means you've completed all of your coursework, you've passed your qualifying exams, your comprehensive exams, your dissertation proposal has been defended, they've agreed to let you loose to go ahead and work on your dissertation. Then you would be gathering data for your dissertation, and you may have to apply to grant funding to pay for that. And then you would write the dissertation. And this can be a fairly fast process, depending on the kind of dissertation, or it can be quite long. There's dissertations that have multiple chapters, and each chapter was one of the articles that you wrote over the course of your PhD program, and you need to come up with basically an introduction and a conclusion that ties them all together. Or there's dissertations that are much longer, like an ethnographic dissertation may require several years of intensive data gathering to really live in and among a group of people, and you end up creating a dissertation that reads a little bit more like an academic book. Or you could have a dissertation which is more like an extended study. It wasn't necessarily something you produced in one of the classes that you've taken, but you're doing a new study where you're gathering data, running some analyses, and interpreting those analyses. And the kind of dissertation you write will affect how long it's going to take. And then your last year of your PhD program, often this is while you're also writing your dissertation and eventually defending it, you're going to be on the market. You're going to be looking for jobs. You're going to be spending a lot of time visiting different campuses, putting yourself out there, writing lots of job application materials. To apply for a job with a PhD is no small feat. It often requires a lot of the candidate. So you would want to be thinking about, it takes a good amount of time, a semester or longer, to even apply and to be on the job market, and how that fits in to this picture. So these are all of the hoops. A dissertation, a PhD program, an EdD program is basically a long series of jumping through many hoops. It takes a lot of internal motivation and internal passion to get you through them all and to get to the finish line. So At this stage, I think maybe the most important thing to ask is, what is the issue in the world that I'm passionate enough about that I want to spend 4 to 6 years of my life answering it, and that I'm passionate enough about it that that passion is going to help me go through all of these institutional hoops that I would need to jump through to get there. But I think all of us here in the program can attest that ultimately it's a very rewarding thing to do and to be a part of.